2020. Can you believe it? The end of a year, the beginning of another. For many, it's a time to take stock, reflect, plan, make resolutions. Some people were talking about resolutions at a wedding reception I was at on New Year's Eve, and that got me thinking. And I was thinking about the year gone by, and I was trying to get past just the stuff that we think of as noise, like, the ongoing Trump stuff, the blackface, Brexit. There were three big things that I saw during 2019, mega narratives that struck me, and one was the ongoing rise and significance of China. They're becoming a dominant world player, and we've all lived our lives with a friendly America being the dominant world player, and maybe sort of the whole European identity as the major world player, but the size of China, demographically, economically, it's about to change all that. And I was telling some folk just before the service that with my son serving on a destroyer recently, playing cat and mouse with Chinese military vessels in the South China Sea, that is very important to me. Second thing that seems to have just come into the collective consciousness at a different level is the potential environmental catastrophe caused by global warming. And really, for too long, we have allowed individuals and communities and businesses to pollute the air and the waters and the land. And for too long, we've cast a blind eye to it, thinking this is a big, big world. But we're learning that pollution affects us all in some way, and the consequences are such that perhaps a generation ago would not have realized. Third thing that has struck me in 2019 is a growing awareness that we live in the Western world, a Western world that has lost its moral compass. And there are alternate truths, fake news, repeated lies, and they all make us wonder where reality lies. Reality has become more fluid than anything most of us have grown up with, and there's very little that grounds us anymore, and grounds some people particularly, and this has led to moral and ethical decay. Well, those are things of the past year, 2019. But this transition that we've just gone through is not only the change of a year, but the change of a decade. And I resonated with a piece in the Times of London by Claire Fogues. I'm just not sure how to pronounce her last name, so we'll go with that. But in noting things like the roaring 20s, warring 40s, the swinging 60s, Ms. Fogues opined that the 2010s were a decade of disconnection. And in the 2010s, she saw one thing that has affected life of just about everybody: the smartphone. And ownership of smartphones, she said, it's above 85% now, 95% among 16 to 24-year-olds, 18 to 24-year-olds. And she says, and I quote, "The dazzling goodies that we can access online through a smartphone can make real life seem pedestrian and achingly slow." And smartphones, they call us out of bed. They call to us when we're in meetings, when we're in the lavatory, when we're in cinemas, in restaurants. I mean, think about it. In 2010, if you took a mobile phone out during a meal, it was considered the height of rudeness. Now, it's just part of the stuff, like the cutlery. We set it on the table. And she says that smartphones and social media They give us access to the world, yet they have detracted from the more meaningful returns of face-to-face interaction. We need more face-to-face interaction, she says, because apparently, she got into some of the science of this, face-to-face interaction brings us shots of, I don't know what this is, oxytocin, dopamine, beta endorphins, and these serve to raise our spirits. Online interaction, however, may give us the odd drop of dopamine when people like our posts, but little else. And so what are we to do? In this age when we can use a smartphone to buy our groceries, order a meal, shop, we don't engage with others. Oh, we still go to coffee shops, but most people in coffee shops are looking at their smartphones. There's disconnection. And Claire Fogue says that all of us need to make firm resolutions to reconnect, to engage in the relationships where we're made for, face-to-face, person-to-person. So this week we have moved into a new year. We have moved into a new decade. But the thing that struck me more than anything else as I reflected on 2020 is the fact that we are now 20 years beyond Y2K. Do you remember Y2K? There may be some younger folk here that may not remember it, but during that time, there was this fear that because the whole computer system was set up with 2 digits for the end of the year, that the whole computer and communication device industry would crash en masse. And it was so worrying that church attendance at my church in Markham moved up by about 30% in the months leading up to Y2K. People were troubled. They were worried and needed some assurance. But it's amazing. We are 20 years beyond Clinton, Chrétien, Columbine. 20 years ago, the height of cool was to have a portable CD player hooked to your belt and plugged-in earphones that were on wires. The world has changed. But what strikes me most about 2020 is that Y2K and 2000 don't seem that long ago. Now I see some younger person shaking her head. I remember those days. And when you thought that 20 years ago was a long time ago. So in saying what I'm saying, I know that there's a bit of an age thing on my part, but it just seems that time is more fleeting than ever. And it struck me that if time has moved fast in the last 20 years, that it's not going to be that long before another 20 years has passed. And then, most of us in this room I'm not going to finish that sentence. My doctor has this computer program, and he plugs all sorts of information in about my blood pressure, my cholesterol, family history, all kinds of other things. And I don't know, I think it was a year or two ago, he said, well, David, you've got an 11% chance of kicking the bucket in the next 10 years. Which puts you with about the average. I didn't ask him what the chances were of making it 20 years, but I assume that percentage rises exponentially to something like 50% because the law of averages catches up with you. And all that makes this transition to 2020, for me personally, perhaps for many of you, people who are maybe my age and older, so sorry to those younger folk who are here, but it makes for us a deep transition. It brings up more questions as we take stock, as we plan, as we make resolutions. It maybe gets us to think about bigger pictures. What meaning is there to life? And our own lives in particular. What have we done? Have we done anything of value? Anything that's important? What does the future hold? Is there any hope? Someone sent me a note this week, and after a sermon that I did in December in which I'd mentioned the series The Crown, she asked me if I had watched episode 7 of season 3 of The Crown. And she said it was a very powerful one to watch. And I decided I needed to step up my watching. Well, actually, I watched it out of order and watched episode 7. And indeed, it was powerful. It focused on Prince Philip, and he was in a crisis at the time of the moon landing in 1969. And Philip was a pilot himself, and he was mesmerized by the bravery and the accomplishments of Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, and it fed into his personal unhappiness about his own life and how his position had been curtailed, or his position had curtailed what he would have liked to have accomplished in life. He was himself pondering life and meaning. And during their tour of the world afterwards, Philip had a little time with the astronauts, and he told them how much he admired what they had done and their accomplishments. And he said in preparation for meeting with them, he was thinking about questions to ask. And at first, he had wanted to ask them questions about technical things and how the G-force, for instance, felt as they took off in that rocket. But he said after a while, he started thinking that the questions he really wanted answered were much deeper. And he asked them about what they had thought when they were out in space and what their perspectives were, for instance, about our place in the universe. And the younger astronauts replied that they hadn't had much time to think of these things because they had been busy the whole journey with work and protocols, and they were portrayed in this series as having little to offer on the deep questions of life. Prince Philip was disappointed with the meeting with the astronauts, and he was a bit distraught, and he made his way to St. George's House, which was on the palace grounds, but was being used by Dean Robin Woods as a place where clergy could go who needed time away to recharge and think through some of the deep issues of life and ministry and their work. And there's some incredible pieces of writing to bring this scene together, and acting as well. And Philip says before this group of clergy, he says, "There wasn't a specific moment when I began feeling the way I do. It seems to have been a gradual descent into doubt and discomfort and general irritability, which others have noticed." He described himself as having a jealous fascination of the achievements of the astronauts. He couldn't find fulfillment, however. And he said, "I'm in the middle of a crisis. And I've done the usual things to make one feel better, things that I will not share with this esteemed group. But the crisis lingers. My mother died recently. She saw something amiss with her youngest child, and she knew what it was. Faith. How's your faith? She asked me. And I have to admit that I've lost it. And without it, what is there? The loneliness, emptiness, anticlimax of going all the way to the moon and finding nothing but a haunting desolation, ghostly silence and gloom. That is more or less what faith is, or faithlessness is, as opposed to finding wonder and the miracle of divine creation and God's design and purpose. What I'm saying, said Prince Philip, is that the solution to human problems is not in scientific ingenuity or rockets or the bravery of young men. The solution to our problems is here or wherever it is that faith resides. And he speaks to Dean Woods, whom he had ridiculed before this. And he said, having ridiculed your work before with these clergy, now I find myself full of respect, admiration, and not a small part of desperation as I ask you all for help. And in a way, that's where many of us, a place many of us come to. Maybe we reach a certain age, certain juncture in life. Maybe it's the change of a year causing us to reflect. Some deep things have affected us, and we start wondering about deeper meanings. And here we are, we're standing just inside the door that says 2020, with time flying by, warp speed. We wonder about our lives and what we're here for, and secrets to the universe, and whether there's any hope. And we can ponder this, and we can ponder these questions for decades, and many people at Eastminster, we all come from different perspectives and different places, and some of us have great faith, some of us have that faith that maybe would link us with the United Church of Canada, some of us have very little. We ask all kinds of questions and have no answers. But I suppose one thing I've learned as I stare at 2020 and beyond is that there is no hope save in Jesus Christ. There is no other. And to say that, we will stand with heavyweights like Tolstoy, who after searching and searching for years found life and meaning in the simple faith of the Russian Orthodox peasants. I suppose it requires a bit of a leap of faith. But it's one, if you'll make it, will give you hope. And it'll give you meaning, and it will impact your world as nothing else. And so as we go into 2020, maybe I could say the same thing I said to a young couple on New Year's Eve as I did a wedding at Timothy Eaton Memorial Church. And I was telling them about the Hebrew word shalom. And shalom. People who speak Hebrew use that as a greeting, shalom. They use it as a word when they're like our bye, shalom. They use it to refer to peace. That's its basic translation into English. But it's a word that means so much more because it's not just to have peace with Iran and the United States. It's to have peace in here, and wholeness and completeness and well-being. And so I wish that young couple, as they stepped out into a different kind of life together, I wish them shalom in their life and in their relationship. And I suppose as we go into 2020, there would be nothing better for us as well. As you're thinking about life and meaning, I wish you shalom, peace, peace, inner peace. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious on you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. Amen.